Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I just saw a couple thumbs up. Good. Okay, so Aaron Rausch is going to be joining us probably in about 15, 20 minutes. He got crunched here this morning on a couple things that Paulo needed, but he will be joining us. So I'm going to go ahead and get this going, and he'll join us in process. So welcome everybody to this is probably number one of at least probably 2 updates we'll have. I would expect that we'll do another update in probably early April. This is a biennium budget year. It will probably not be like any other budget year where we have updates as we go along because we learn different things as the House bill works its way to become a law for next year's biennium budget. So I'll get just moving on that. Well, first of all, I should probably say that the budget usually, as think you know, goes from the governor's office, who has to by law, if you're a sitting governor, have it out by February 1st. It will get a House bill number and it will run. It will go to the House, and probably in May it will go to the Senate. The Senate will give it a Senate bill number, and then it will go from the Senate, and then there'll be a conference committee between the House and the Senate and the governor's office. And it usually is about the last week in June when we actually know what it is funding for 22 and 23 will actually be and what the formula will be, if it will be anything different. So that's the process this year, like that every 2 years. So a couple of quick things that we're going to need. I think I sent an email out to everybody, but I know for several people, this is your first year working with us. You went through the fall with us, but for the May update, we do like to hear from you on when you believe your targeted April or May date is that you'd like to take your forecast to the board. We all keep kind of a critical path sheet on all of our clients, so we know exactly where we're at, what forms that we've asked for and haven't got, whether we still need your tax settlement, et cetera, and when we need to target, getting you ready for your board and things like that. So if you haven't told us that, I know several of my clients have, I appreciate that. Just be thinking about that and let us know. So what we normally do at this time of the year, of course, is we've already prepared your forecast models. We had that done back in December for the May forecast. What we normally do is we will be updating your revenues, trying to get the forecast out by the end of March or early April. And then, of course, we'll work with you on your expenses to be thinking about that. I know I've had a couple folks that have negotiations they want to get ready for, so we'll probably get those forecasts updated to the extent that we can the end of February and to them, and then show them how to work with the model for negotiations. But if you have a particular circumstance you need to get your forecast updated a little earlier, just let your forecaster know. But otherwise, we usually, the trigger for us is usually when your final first half real estate and manufactured home settlements are out. That is usually the trigger for us to go ahead and completely update your revenue once we have that piece of information on your taxes in. So that usually occurs in March, or I should say no later than March. There's only a few counties that typically go past that, and we know who they are. But I would want to tell you that there was a lot of county auditors that indicated that there was some issues with the Department of Taxation this year getting effective tax rates back to them on time, and caused maybe a 2 to 3 week delay. So don't be surprised if you normally get a tax settlement the middle of February, that it might be the first part of March now. So that's one of the things that we see, because the benefit we have is we work with districts literally all over the state of Ohio, and we're kind of hearing a common theme with that. So just expect that probably a 2 week delay from what your normal first half would be. But when you get that information, of course, we're going to want to have that. Once we have that, we also are going to pull your state aid simulations that are current. and your casino, your school district income tax. We'll have all of that information. We'll be looking at the High Department of Taxation for your detailed tax values for class 1 and 2 when available, and I'll show you what that looks like. I appreciate and still encourage everybody to send us your values. We particularly need your PUP values for tax year 20, because that information is not usually posted by the High Department of Taxation until the end of May. Detailed values that we need for class 1 and 2 are loosely typically published in data that we download somewhere between middle of February and loosely the beginning of April. The Department of Taxation does not have a rigid timeline that they follow, so they kind of get to that stuff we've noticed over the last many years in between those periods of time. So and what I mean by that is, when I say we need the detailed information from the Department of Taxation on abstracts, I'm going to use this as an example. This is a spreadsheet right here that we pull together, and we literally get the details of all of your abstract information from all of your taxing districts. So it's not just one or two, or some districts that we work with have over 25 taxing districts. So this kind of puts it all together, including multiple counties. But then that allows us to take a look at what your value of new construction minus demolition is. And you'll see that that crosswalks over right to your 5-year forecast that we have in terms of your tax tab. I know a lot of times clients have always wondered, how do you get your taxes as accurate as you do? Well, you have to have this type of detailed information to be able to do that. I pulled Marysville because they went through a reappraisal this last year. You can see right off, it was almost a 13% in class 1, but this is where we kind of pull that information in. And again, it's to the dollar. So the data that we typically get from you right now is usually a letter from the county auditor telling us what your total class 1 is and class 2. And that's good. That gives us an idea of what direction your values are moving. But until we can get this completely detailed data, from the Department of Taxation, we don't know what caused it to move where. And of course, if it's new construction, that's going to be new money on your millages. If it's just reappraisal, it's only going to be new money on your inside millage. So it does impact your and our abilities to project your tax revenues highly accurately. And then here's class 2, commercial industrial, the same sort of data we pull and put down here into our tax tab that all look pretty much the same for all of our clients. You'll also notice there's no additional column for PUP value. That's again because the Department of Taxation is putting this information out for things that require rollbacks in your voted millage, but they don't put the PUP out because that's going to be at gross. So that will be out near the end of May typically. Sometimes it goes into June before we can get that, unless folks send us the values, which is what we request. So we definitely need to keep getting your values is what I'm saying, but that the values that we get for class 1 and 2 may not be at the detail level that we are going to need, but we'll get that. But we can't get your PUP values from the Department of Taxation until May. So if you send that to us, that'll be good if we can get that information. So state aid, a couple of things on state aid. Again, we'll be updating your state aid for you. A couple of quick things we've noticed is that the casino estimates for the August and January payments, when we take a look at what we had projected, because it looks like the numbers that we projected were going to be down about 40%. It looks like they're going to be up to about $42 and a penny per pupil. That would be up about $9.68 per pupil in fiscal year 21, or about a 29% increase over what we typically projected for most of our clients, which was right around at $32 a student. So there'll be some additional money for casino revenue for fiscal year 21. That also, I believe, bodes pretty well for fiscal year 22 and 23. So casino money in fiscal year 22 may come back, very close to what it was back here in 20. So that looks like that's good news. We will also pick up the November #2 fiscal year 20 state aid final adjustment, and any adjustments from the executive order 2021-01D that the governor put out, restoring state aid, or as they called it, the finalized cuts for fiscal year 21, which ultimately is less of a cut than what it had originally intended. So that really means additional money for you for 21. So nobody should be getting less state aid in 21 than what we had projected. So we'll be picking that up. And then, of course, any other adjustments to your revenue, such as open enrollment in, things like that. Those usually are things we tweak in your other income. And then finally, for fiscal year 22 and 23, again, it looks as though the governor came halfway back with the funding that he cut. He cut $300.5 million from education in 20 and started out that way in 21, as you know. So obviously, his executive order restoring part of that money this year. And it looks like next year, he's put about $125 million in funding for foundation for 22. So that would pretty much get your funding back to what it was intended to be in fiscal year 20, which was the fiscal year 19 levels, which were guaranteed. So for those of you who I think went with us on projecting your FY22 23 foundation back to FY19 levels, that I guess we'll find out if that's a good estimate or not, but it certainly seems to be well reasoned. The money is there. So I still think that's a good number until, we see the end of June that it's not a good number, but I still think it will be. So that's kind of what we're thinking about for 22, 23. So most of our clients who went with us on those estimates for 22, 23 should be okay. And of course, then we typically froze 24 and 25 at the 23 level. So again, not taking any big chances, projecting revenue that we didn't know anything about. So, okay, again, we will need your final real estate and manufactured home first half settlement sheets for all counties, and including your rollback and homestead, which isn't a trouble for most of our clients, but we do have about 5 counties out there. I think Union County comes to mind, Jefferson comes to mind, where they have a settlement software where they give you the settlement sheets, but the actual rollback and homestead settlement sheets they publish on different forms, and those forms are typically titled apportionment by levy for state reimbursements, and it has a form number T014.03. We need those forms too, because we also use that data when we update your property taxes to make sure that your rollback and homestead is running true with what we projected as well. We do like to take a look at your cash receipts and expenses by forecast lines from July 1st, 20 through January 31, 21, or February 28th, 21, whenever you get around to getting that information to us. What that does is it allows us to go back and take a look at your posting, take a look at what we've posted. I can suffice it to say, if you've been a client with us for a long time, you know that we will typically follow up with you when something doesn't look right, and maybe it's something we misinterpreted, or maybe it's something that was missed. But either way, it's always good to have 2 sets of eyes on that. But that definitely helps us with these forms and these reports out of your system, make sure that our model and your books are running tight with one another. And that's important for us to do that. So the type of reports that we need right now, we have 3 different prevalent type of softwares out in the state. If you're on Classic, we need the SM2 MON monthly. In Redesign, we need the spending plan monthly. And if you're an EFP, we need the annual spending plan. So also, we're going to need you to send us your tax year 20 tax rates and common forms that the county auditors all have are the DTE 515. They have DTE 046. Some of them put it to you as a client in a letter from the county auditor, just showing you what the values and the rates will be. If they do that by letter, just make sure that, or we'll let you know that if it doesn't have the class 1 and class 2 effective rates, it's not going to be of a lot of value to us for that. So what that looks like, here's a report from the SM2 from Classic State Software. Again, we like to see it broken down by month. That way, when we go back and take a look at what we posted for the first half, or the second half, I guess, however you would look at it, or the August of 20 settlement, we can see what we posted, see what you posted, and we usually try to tie these out to the dollar. And most of the time, they actually absolutely do. Unless we might have some border revision settlements in here and you post that to 001-111010, that's where we would find that difference, but we would track that down. But this type of detail helps us see and make sure that our model and your books are running tight, and that's important to do. We do the same thing with expenses. We take a look at what your wages and your fringes are running and get an idea how well we're running close with what the estimates are. And if you are, we'll tell you. If you aren't, we'll probably mention something to you to see if we got a 26 or a 3-week pay month in there that we hadn't counted on or something like that. But that's what we do. Here's an example of what some county auditors, and I know most of you will look at it and think, man, that's a pretty nice county auditor that sends this out. But this is, Annette, I know you're on here. Hope you don't mind me using your stuff as an example, but this is something that the Allen County Auditor, I think, does about as good as anybody in the state. This is the data that they send out to their school districts up there, and you can tell it shows you what your values are, what the new values are. They even give you a little snapshot of what they pull out as what they believe new construction was. Pretty nice. They show you what your effective tax rates, your gross, your effective class 1, class 2. So this is the kind of stuff that if your county auditor sends that out, that's very helpful. Also, lots of other cool data on here, like emergency levies, when they begin, what tax year they begin, what tax year they end. It's really a nice sheet. But regardless, most county auditors do communicate and send their school district something. And if you get that, just forward it on to your forecaster. That helps us go in and help build that tax tab out for you and have it ready for you. Here's an example of a DTE 515 if you've never seen that. This is, again, something that comes back from the Department of Taxation to the county auditors that they can then use to begin to put the tax bills together and things like that. And what it does is it shows you your gross millage over here, and it shows you your effective rates for class 1 over here and class 2 over here. And it also tells you whether they are what they call qualified or not. So any levy prior to 2013, or to 2013 and prior, would still have rollback, the 10 and a 2.5% rollback. Anything past that, that's a new levy, will not. So those are called qualified levies. So again, it's a DTE 515. Every county gets them. It's not just limited to a few counties. They all have them, whether they admit they got it or not. And they probably don't think you need to see this kind of stuff if you have that kind of county auditor. A lot of county auditors take the approach, and I think you'll know if you have one like this, that the less they give you, the less you have to question them with. Okay. So, but the truth is they have a lot of stuff that you need. Here's an example of a DTE 046 form. Again, all counties have this. Right here's the form number. This will show you what the class 1, and they call it other value, but that's just commercial industrial right here. They don't necessarily show you your PUP value. It's just those two values. But we can still gather data from here. Your tax rates, your effective rates for class 1 are here. Effective rates for class 2 are down here. So there's information that we can derive from this form if it's the only one they send you. It's also for some of the new treasurers that might be on, if you're in multiple counties, one of your counties is designated as your home county, which means that all the data that is generated from the other counties in terms of values and things does kind of flow through your typical, your one home county. They're the ones that report things to you, and we handle your budget documents, your amended certificates of estimated resources, things like that. This form identifies in this particular school district, you can see they're in county. They're in, this is Harrison Hills. They're in 4 different counties, but only one is going to be your home county. And it's typically the one where you have the bulk of your property area typically. In fact, I can't think of one that comes to mind that wouldn't be where you have the bulk of your area. May not be the bulk of your value, but typically the bulk of your area and value run, hand in hand. But so with property taxes, just keeping in mind, we did not see skyrocketing delinquent taxes in class 1 or 2 in the second half of 2019. We are, we typically saw delinquencies maybe 2.5%, which wasn't much different than what most of our clients typically ran this last year. We aren't sure that's going to continue. We think the first half of 2020, one of the most interesting things, I know as soon as I see a settlement sheet that's final, I'm going to be digging into, is finding out what's going on with class 2. I think we all know, this Zoom meeting being a good example, there's a lot of businesses that aren't renting commercial property now to have a office. They're having people work from home. You have a lot of small restaurants going out. Shopping malls are struggling. They'll be going out. In fact, I heard that it'll take 7 years before commercial property ever comes back to where they were back in March of 20 before this all began. So you're just going to keep an eye on this. I don't expect class 1 to see delinquency increase for one big reason that was different than it was in 2008 and 9. 2008 and 9, many homeowners' homes were upside down with their mortgage. Right now, I think most of you have probably heard stories of bidding wars for houses that are for sale. I can tell you here in Delaware, they usually sell houses with coming soon signs, and they're usually accepting bids that are anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 more than what the asking price is. So I think most people will do anything they can to keep their homes if they have them, because they're actually a true store of value now. With public utility personal property, Nexus and Rover, the pipelines, it's the ongoing saga. If you have a pipeline, Nexus has filed 2 appeals on their 19 AV, Rover filed 1. They are pending Board of Tax Appeals at the state in May 2021 for a hearing. What happened last year with, I know it happened with Rover, I think it happened with Nexus. They basically made a big payment in January, and then they made a small payment in August. So first half was big, second half small. When I took a look at the values, they were saying that the pipelines were worth in the school districts that I looked at. It turned out to be that first half bigger payment and the second half smaller, when you add them together, was exactly what the PUP taxes would have been on the lower value that they filed. So that would be kind of a worst case scenario, because they're filing the lowest value and they were paying on it. One would hope that the Department of Taxation or the Board of Tax Appeals would, even if they split the baby and, King Solomized that, you would at least think that the value would be higher than what they filed for. And what that would mean is, instead of having a refund that you would have to owe out of a future tax settlement back to the pipeline company, you probably are going to have an additional amount of delinquent taxes, what it will be called, that they will owe you when this settlement case is over, or at least that's how I hope it works. But either way, the Nexus second appeal in some cases was to lower value by 60%. Now, it looks like the Department of Taxation has taken on a little bit of game theory. It looks like the ODT has agreed to a slightly lower value for tax year 20 for PUP, for Nexus at least, and I would expect the same for Rover. And it's about 12% lower than what they had the value set at 19. Now, it looks like it could be a good faith offer to say, hey, we'll agree that maybe that value in 19 was higher. The Board of Tax Appeals tossed it out. They come back and filed again. Now maybe we're going to agree with a lower value of 12%. but that's certainly not 60% less. So hopefully they'll say, hey, look, we tried to work with you on this, and maybe they're just setting the stage to tell both the pipelines, nope, we gave you 12% off. That's the best we're going to do. You weren't willing to negotiate with us, then we're just going to throw this out and take what the ODT said the values are. Again, do I know that's to be true? No. Do I hope that's what happens? Yeah, because then you're going to be getting some nice delinquent taxes back, and you're going to be collecting at a much higher level. So anyway, CAUV, again, just to point out that, I have seen some value decreases this year in class 1 property value. And I know up front, right off the bat, home values are going up. And I know that CAUV in some cases going down. So what caused it to go down, if it went down, would be the CAUV almost inevitably. So, the fact is that back in 17 through 19, during those 3 years of reappraisals and updates, the average was around 30% decrease in CAUV value. Now there's still a little bit more for woodland, pasture land, and some cropland that needs to come out. Also, crop prices, as they fall, there's a 7-year cropping pattern that they use in this, and they drop the high and the low, and they take the 5 in the middle, so to speak. So as crop values do tend to come down, they're going to be dropping out a high, a low, but it's still going to be trending down a little bit, but I don't think 30%, anything like that at all. But do just keep in mind, this is what the CAUV value has looked like. It skyrocketed from 11 to 14, and it's on, and then, you can kind of see it's been kind of moderating to go down. So I think most of this has washed through, frankly. So there might still be a little bit every time you have a reappraisal and update. That's when CAUV values are adjusted. They're not adjusted annually. It's on the 3-year cycles. But I would expect, if nothing else, if no other law changes are made, if crop prices continue to just slightly go down, then obviously the values of the CAUV should go down as well. We do look inside of your class 1. We have the ability to look inside that. So, you can tell, again, I'll use Marysville as an example. We can break your class 1 apart once we get data from the Department of Taxation to do so. So we can kind of see, and you can see here that when Marysville went through their reappraisal, their CAUV, their ag values actually fell about $4 million. But it was overwhelmed by the fact that their residential went up, almost, $82 million. So, pretty good data. So we have this data on all of our clients. So we if we see something that doesn't look right, we'll keep digging until we see what was going on with it. So we know, and we can say that in your notes. So school district income tax. First of all, of course, we don't suggest you completing your forecast until you see the April 2021 quarterly settlement. We do not think April filing will be moved to July 2021. In fact, when I looked at the state's revenue estimates for themselves, it looks like they're very much leaving it alone for April of 2021. National employment is around 6.7% as of yesterday. And if you think full employment's typically around 4%, so we're coming down. It was 8.4% this last fall, so it's coming down. So we have tracked the current withholdings and how much money districts are collecting fiscal year 09 through January 2021, the settlement that we just got. And it looks like back in November, if you recall, we were typically suggesting that for 21, you look at a -5 to -10%, in terms of your school district income tax from fiscal year 20 levels, and then 0% growth in 22, and then maybe 1 to 3% for 23 through 25. Through January 2021, I did a random sample of 10 districts where we're seeing potential losses in fiscal year 21. Now, this is using the data from July, October, and January, and looking like what we're estimating in April. And it looks like the potential losses could be as high as, in the ones that I looked at, maybe as high as -5.03% to actually an increase of 1.5% over fiscal year 20. So it's very much going to depend on your district. The 1.5 was more of a city setting, and the 5.03 was more of a rural setting. So, but when I did the average on the 10, it was minus 4.25% from fiscal year 20 levels. All the clients I looked at with what we had estimated for 21, you're going to be really pretty much right in the ballpark. Those look pretty solid. We generally have growth at 0 to 2% for fiscal year 22 and then 1 to 3% in 23. Again, those projections are looking pretty solid. The state of Ohio for fiscal year 22 is very difficult to try to break apart because when they moved the income tax filing from April last year to July, it's kind of convoluted. But 23 looks pretty clean, and it looked like they're looking at a 4.5% growth rate in personal income tax. So school district income tax, bottom line is it's going to recover pretty much about how we have these things set in your model right now, and probably you're going to do a little better would be my guess. So that's good news. State aid, executive order 2021-01D. We know we got about 50% of the way back for fiscal year 21 from where we were supposed to be. The governor's budget added about 125 million for fiscal year 22. We're projecting state aid will come back to fiscal year 19 levels in 22, 23. Don't know what the formula might be for that, but we expect they'll come back. State tax revenues for 21 look like they'll be up about 926 million to 1.1 billion over 20, and fiscal year 22 up about 908 million over fiscal year 21. So we believe, frankly, that those are probably conservative. That would be the right way to budget that, I would. So I would look at these as probably the minimum that'll happen. House Bill 1 was introduced on February 3rd. And that's going to be the fair school funding bill. What impact on 22 and 23 that'll have, we'll have to wait and see. If a formula is approved, however, it will probably have to have guarantees in it and caps for a lot of different reasons, but I don't think 125 million in new money is not likely close enough to fund it, even if it was on a 6-year phase in, which is what it was on the last go around. So I'm going to guess also that state legislatures aren't going to look favorably, because I know there was some districts that would have lost money on that. I don't think they would probably be looking favorably when they're trying to recover and get things back on track in the state that somebody gets less money in 22 than they got before. So, but anyway, we suggest using the estimates in the final FY21 cuts and then use House Bill 166 amounts, which are basically FY19 levels for 22, 23, funding restored back to those levels. 24 and 25, of course, is going to depend on what we learn in this budget, but we're not going to know really what happens in 24, 25 until June of 23. Just keep in mind, it wouldn't be unfathomable to think that they will pass House Bill 1, a new funding formula, and delay implementation to the 24-25 year. That's something that I've seen more of in the last decade, where they pass things, TPP, things like that, where they phase it in at a later point in time. But we'll wait and see on that. What would I do right now? It's okay to tell your board administration when they see all these numbers come out to just kind of chill. The budget proposal is preliminary and it must work itself through the legislative process. It won't start to get really clear until probably sometime in May, certainly not until the end of June when we know when it is clear. Student Wellness Success Funds and ESSER II. I think Aaron's going to talk a lot more about this perhaps, but no district will get less than 131% in 21 of what they got in 20. Those estimates were just published probably a half hour to 45 minutes ago. We'll get that stuff out to you. ESSER II, obviously no significant increase of 3 to 4 times your ESSER I. You're still going to use Fund 507. You obviously need to keep that separate from ESSER I, so you're going to need to use a special cost center for the revenue and the expenses. The impact this will have on your forecast is going to depend on if your district will be shifting expenses from general fund or covering brand new costs like summer school programs to help students catch up. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Aaron, our favorite person at the ODE, and let him take her from there. So let me see if I can get Aaron logged in as a host.
Great. Well, while you were doing that, I'll just thank you for the invitation, and it's good to be with you this afternoon. You know, a lot of what Chris talked about related to changes in valuations, pipeline, CAUV, you know, property valuation changes, et cetera, that all plays into simulations, especially, you know, as the fair funding proposal restarts, and you'll no doubt be looking at simulations of House Bill 1. Those will just, you know, everything that he just said are going to be things that you take into account and keep in mind when you look at, you know, under a specific proposal, I'm slated to get more or less funding. Let's talk about, so my goal today is to hopefully answer any questions you have. I have said this to a few of you. This is always perhaps one of the most frustrating couple weeks in my position, because the Blue Book has come out. We know the appropriation numbers. The simulations were released a few hours ago, and we don't have the actual bill language. So to answer all of your really important, detailed, specific questions, I will, the simulations that OBM released gave a little more information that I will hopefully fill in the gaps, but we're in a slightly unfortunate position where, you know, not everything of the governor's budget has become public, and so oftentimes these conversations lead to more questions than answers. So I will do my best to cover everything. I want to start just by putting kind of a bow on FY21. So as Chris mentioned, a couple weeks ago, the governor executed an executive order that finalizes the budget reductions. And I have, perhaps like he has, struggled to articulate like what actually happened, because it was a reduction in the, it was a reduced reduction than what everybody was expecting. So his executive order in 20 cut school funding by $300 million. The Senate then, unhappy that some wealthier districts saw a disproportionate reduction, offset that by about $23 million. So the net cut to school districts in 2020 was about $277 million. That's the amount that we have been carrying on your SFPR and statement of settlement for the first half of the year. We received $160 million back available to us. We used 152 of that 160 to reduce the reduction of your FY21 cut. So your FY21 cut drops from 277 million down to 125. And then in the governor's proposal eliminates that $125 million reduction entirely, right? Bringing you back to your FY19 levels. So you will notice that OBM only released simulations of the student wellness and success funding, and they did not specifically tell you what your foundation funding was going to be. You can look at the FY21 cut spreadsheet that we released last week and see that the first column, which was your FY19 funding, that is going to be the governor's proposed FY20 and 22 and 23 funding levels. So that is what happened with state aid in fiscal year 21. We ran your February #1 payment reports early. So those are available online, and you can see, and especially for those of you that received the House Bill 164 offset funding, you will see that in the February #1 settlement, that is reversed, and we move that payment up to your line A SFPR. So everyone will see a pretty big bump in their biweekly distribution in February #1, and then that will kind of settle out through the remainder of the year. But for those of you that were getting that 164 money, we eliminated that because that was really just for 20, and we formalized it in the reductions on line A on the SFPR. The other thing that we did that Chris mentioned in the February #1 payment is that we applied the student wellness and success funding guarantee. So many of you remember or experienced that your student wellness funding in FY21 was maybe less than FY20. It was not as much as you were expecting it to be. And that was because of changes in census poverty data. There was a pretty innocuous provision that was put in the capital bill that basically directed ODE to use the balance of funds of the $400 million appropriated for student wellness this year and push that out to schools. So what we did is we established a growth guarantee. And so you'll see this new calculation on the student wellness detailed worksheet on your SFPR, starting with February #1, that everyone is receiving at least 131% of what they received in FY20 this year. So that provided a bump to a number of schools that were caught up in this issue with census poverty data. I will, and then is there anything in FY? So the only thing that I would say is that make sure that you pay particular attention to your February #2 deductions, because we only update the community school deductions in the second payment of the month. So just like you are getting money back in a reduced reduction, the community schools are also getting a slightly higher per pupil amount. So that means that your deduction is going to increase about $48 per pupil. So it should be a simple, I mean, you'll see it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but if you want to know now, it's just multiply how many community school students you have by $48, and that is how much your deduction for that line is going to increase. We put out, I will segue a little bit, we put out on our Reset Restart page, we put out data insights page, and it talks about statewide the changes in enrollment we have seen. We have seen a lot of students move to online community schools. They have about doubled or increased like 50% in their enrollment this year compared to last year. And we've also just generally seen fewer students in public districts. Who would have ever imagined that having a frozen formula would have been, a bit of a lifesaver to some of you who would have otherwise experienced declining state funding because of declining enrollment. You didn't have to worry about because there wasn't actually a calculation. And at least, in the governor's proposal would not be at issue either. It's difficult to say though, will kindergarten classes be a lot larger next year? Will kids return from e-schools next year? Which is also just something to keep in mind when you are thinking about, when you're looking at these simulations and when you're thinking about the impacts of some of the school funding discussions you're going to have, in the legislature over the next 5 months. The last thing I want to say is that for FY21 is that we had planned on prorating the $500,000 maintenance equalization payments for those of you that get that in June every year. Because of the governor's action in January, we won't have to do that. So you'll receive the full amount in June. I do want to remind folks, and I think I had sent Chris the full list maybe 6 or 9 months ago, but many of you, not many, but a good number of you who have school facilities commission projects that get that half maintenance equalization payment from the state, you will see those funds go away eventually. Those last for 23 years and then they fall off. And so last year was the first year that that was a final payment for a school district. There will be more and more schools that are in that situation. So if you receive that $500,000 maintenance equalization, I'm sure that Chris is building that into your forecasts, even though it doesn't go in your general fund, but is aware of that. So if you have a question, work with him, and feel free obviously to reach out to me, because that's one place where we show in in the governor's executive budget that $500,000 maintenance payment is decreasing every year as more districts roll off of their 23 year facilities project.
Well, some of the folks that when we get the information where we have seen that it has been put in the general fund, we always tell them it needs to go in your 034. So we get that, catch it. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yep. So so that is everything with fiscal year 21. And so if you look at if you look at your payments today, the February number one is available online right now. That is really, is not going to change in a significant way between now and the end of the fiscal year.
Excellent.
So fiscal year 22-23 executive recommendations. So the governor proposes restoring your state foundation funding back to your FY19 levels. That adds about $125 million in the first year. It is flat in the second year. Some of you maybe noticed, if you looked at the blue book that we release, saw that there's actually a cut to the GRF foundation funding line by about $29 million in year 2. We fund your state foundation payments with both GRF and lottery funds. And so what a little bit of the complicating factor, confusion, whatever that we are seeing in the governor's proposal is that in the first year of the budget, we reduce our reliance on the lottery, and then in the second year, we increase it. So there's basically this year, we are spending about 1.3 billion out of the Lottery Profits Education Fund. The state lottery only committed to transferring profits of, I want to say, like 1.15 or 1.2 billion. And so basically they can't, we have some cash in that fund that has built up that we are spending down this biennium. The legislature 2 years ago, when they made their budget, assumed that the lottery by this point would have electronic lotteries, like gambling on your phone, which has not happened. And so some of the revenues that they were anticipating did not materialize. So one of the things the budget office has done in the K-12 education budget is to kind of reset the button on the lottery profits. So there's a drop in the first year, and then it rebounds in the second year. But as you're looking at, and this is where there's always confusion, like, well, it looks like there's more than $125 million increase to foundation. Why is that? But that's foundation. It is not explicitly stated anywhere, although I feel comfortable telling you that the governor proposes, continued funding for the enrollment growth supplement, basically at the same dollar amount for anyone who is receiving that now. So if you're getting $500,000 in the enrollment growth supplement this year, you would, under the governor's proposal, get $500 for the next 2 years, flat amount. We wouldn't actually recalculate anything. You would continue to just receive those amounts. And then obviously the continued focus from the DeWine administration is on the student wellness and success funding. So the governor adds $100 million in each year of the biennium. You probably have heard and seen the fact sheets point to $1.1 billion for student wellness and success. Sometimes this biennial math gets a little, cutesy, that it's not $1.1 billion in new money. It is moving from 400 million this year to 500 the year after that to 600 in the second year of the biennium. The census poverty data is still the driver for these calculations. Although if you look at the footnotes on the printouts that came out, you will see that OBM plans to use and modify the law accordingly, the census data for both years of the biennium, so as to not run into the simulation, the actual versus estimate issue that we experienced this year. They also, I think, are explicit in saying that a student wellness guarantee would remain. And so, so everybody is going to get at least as much student wellness money in 22 as they got in 21, in 23 as they got in 22. And we anticipate, if you add up the 3 spreadsheets, they're spending less than 500 million in the first year, less than 600 million in the second. So there potentially would be, a growth guarantee built into that as well. So the changes that we executed in the February #1 payment are presumably going to carry through into 22 and 23. The last thing that the footnotes reveal, you read very carefully, is that OBM has simulated your student wellness payments based on your FY20 enrollment. Because of the disruption that the pandemic has caused to your FY20 enrollment, the move to online schools, perhaps just an overall drop in your enrollment, OBM plans to use FY22 enrollment data for both the 22 and the 23 student wellness payment, which is hinted to in their footnotes. But that is the plan. Knowing that 21 is a disruptive year, they would use current year data in the first year, for student wellness, and then go back to prior year in the second. I guess I will share with you that generally I think that OBM chose to rely on census poverty data rather than your economically disadvantaged data that is on your report card and on your payment reports, because of the pandemic, the waivers from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that every one of your students is receiving a free lunch. The disadvantaged data this year is actually very unreliable because of the waivers that USDA has provided for child nutrition programs. So, all of that can change through the budget process. There no doubt will be a lot of discussion about how schools have used student wellness funds, if some of those funds might be captured to use for or incorporated into a House Bill 1 fair funding proposal. But that's what I can tell you about what the simulations are, where the numbers came from, how things were calculated, which is, I know, always a question that you're trying to figure out as soon as you look at this. I think, because I know that we're kind of out of time, what Chris said about like kind of recovery, it surprisingly, no one would have ever guessed it 6 months ago, but it is a really, it is a really not uncomplicated. I guess I'm looking for the words, like things are not bad. It's a good budget. There is a lot of growth for a lot of programs that the state funds. One of me, and there's an assumption that income tax growth will continue. Director Murnix yesterday in her testimony talked about the pandemic effect of the sales tax, which I've spoken about a few times, people shifting their spending habits from non-taxable to taxable goods. They are being pretty conservative about how long that will last, but as long as there are, additional payments coming from the federal government, direct payments to individuals, they believe that the pandemic effect of, sales tax will continue. And the distinction on the state income tax is that state income tax does not apply to the first about $22,000 of income. And so the impact that the pandemic has had and unemployment has had has not really materialized to state revenues through the income tax in the same way that it has for the school district income tax, because of the fact that basically low wage workers already don't contribute to the sales tax. The big increase that we are seeing generally in the state budget is in the health and human services area, is in Medicaid. And I will circulate Director Murnix's testimony, because she has included in her testimony a few really interesting charts and graphs related to Medicaid enrollment. Right now, the federal government, there's a split. We pay a certain percent of Medicaid costs and the federal government picks up the rest. That typically is, the federal government pays 63%. It's different for every state, and we pick up the rest. Because of the pandemic and the federal emergency declaration, there's what is called an enhanced FMAP, or federal Medicaid percentage. And so now every Medicaid dollar that's spent, the federal government picks up an additional 6.2. So they're picking up close to 70% of our Medicaid expenses, and we pick up, 30%. That ends right now, the end of this calendar year. And so there's like a $2 billion increase in Medicaid, like 30% increase in Medicaid expenditures that is assumed in the second year of the state budget, because we have to assume that that is going to go away, that it won't get that it won't continue. So a lot of the new revenue or the growth in state revenues is being dedicated in the Health and Human Services Medicaid arena, both because of the increased caseload as well as the drop in this assumed drop in this Medicaid rate. The last thing I think I will say about the state budget is the way that the budget process works. OBM puts together revenue estimates, and that's how they build the executive proposal. But the Legislative Service Commission, or the Legislative Budget Office, they put together their own revenue assumptions. And it's really up to the legislature to make determinations about which one to use, what to rely on. The revenue estimates that the Legislative Budget Office produced were almost $900 million more over the biennium than what OBM built their budget on. And so it will be interesting to see what the legislature does with that and how much additional spending they add over the next 2 years. Chris said this, the budget is going to change in the House, it will change in the Senate, it will probably change in conference committee compared to each of those three versions. And so it is really anyone's best guess about where things land. But historically, the House has always tried to add more money for K-12 education than what was in the governor's proposal. And the Senate has tried to one-up the House and add additional resources. Pending a downturn in the economy, it would seem that we are, setting ourselves up for that situation. The big question is going to be, obviously, where within the K-12 space do those new dollars get put, and how does that, impact individual and specific districts? So Chris's advice about, kind of wait and see is certainly appropriate as we move through the budget process over the next 5 months. I will pause there or end there because I know that we're kind of over time, but I'm happy to answer, questions that anyone has.
Aaron, I sent a little chat note in here. We had a question.
Yeah. I didn't talk about ESSER at all, so I will do that. Sorry, thank you. ESSER II funds. We released the estimated allocations on the 22nd through a CCIP note. It included a draft application. I think that the application is nearly complete, so you should get the final allocations and the application within the next week or so, but no later than the end of this month. And those funds are retroactive to March 13th of 2020. Not that any of you are likely going to go back into the prior fiscal year and claim reimbursement, but they're available to you. And the list of allowable uses is effectively the same as what it was in the first round, with a bit of additional emphasis on learning loss, learning recovery, additional supports for students, some of whom have been in a remote setting since last March. There also is some more explicit allowable authority for you to make facilities upgrades, HVAC system replacements, repairs, etc., to assist with air quality or social distancing or anything like that. I know there was a question about purchasing like a true land purchase or a building purchase. We think, so all of the uniform guidance still applies to ESSER II, but if you can make a justification as to why you are making the purchase and it relates to COVID, then work with your federal programs consultant, and it is likely possible. My advice to everyone is that if you are making any sort of equipment or capital purchase, that you just have a conversation or enter into the history log in CCIP what your are planning on doing, just so that there is a bit of a conversation with your federal programs consultant on that. They're aware of it. They're the experts, but I had a conversation with the office a few days ago, and they believe that it would be possible, given the details and kind of the unique situation. So the ESSER II funds are a lot, and I know that there are a lot of you that are getting a lot of money. You will hear the focus from the Department of Education, and I think from the governor, is going to be on learning loss, on what are some ways that you can spend new money one time, though, right? So it's sustainable. You don't have to worry about an ongoing cost, to provide some additional supports to students with disabilities, one-on-one tutoring, summer literacy camps, etc., extended school day. So you're going to be hearing that from us. I think that we are likely to partner with educational service centers, giving them some of our state activity funds so that they can help you with this. Because I know some of it is just figuring out, how the heck am I going to do it? We know that schools are going to want to shift some of their general fund expenditures over to ESSER II, which is completely allowable, continuity of operations, especially those of you that are looking at really, really large allocations. Just be mindful of IDEA and Title I maintenance of effort requirements. IDEA, 100% of what you had spent for special ed in the prior year, and Title I, 90% of what you spent in total in the prior year. So these ESSER funds are not part of that maintenance of effort calculation. So they are federal funds, and you just need to be mindful of how much you shift over into this. And then, if ESSER II wasn't enough, the Senate last night, appeared to, in DC, appears to be moving forward on the Biden COVID relief package. And that includes $130 billion for K-12 schools, compared to the $54 billion that was ESSER II. And so that is, more than twice as much as what ESSER II was, with most of that, and I've been trying to get the details, but it seems that they are pushing out most of that $130 billion in what we would maybe call ESSER III. So, I don't know what will happen. I will share with you in confidence, right, that almost every single one of you have said, we have no idea what we're going to do with all of this money. And so it is almost unfathomable to think that you will be getting twice as much in an ESSER III round that you got, well, that you actually have not even received yet. But we will continue to follow that. And as soon as we have information, we'll be certain to let you know.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
From the chat. Okay, so this is a question. Are we going to be allowed to put staff currently paid from the general fund into ESSER II and then move back to general fund without supplant penalty?
Yes, you will. Just be mindful. And my recommendation would be, don't move any of your special ed teachers.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. I'll put that down. No special ed. Next question. Can ESSER funds be used for security of a building?
Yes, I believe so. One of the allowable uses of ESSER is anything that is authorized under ESEA, which includes Title IV, which is for safe and secure schools, as one of the allowable uses. So yes, facility upgrades to school safety would presumably fall under the allowable use of ESSER.
Okay. Had a question from a young feller here. Yeah, I can't remember what the question.
As you're looking for that, the first allowable use under ESSER is anything that you would use your title funds for, IDEA funds for, Perkins, McKinney-Vento. So as you're thinking through how you might use these funds, don't lose sight of that allowable use, which is kind of, lumped in together as one allowable use, but within each, within Title I, Title II, Title III, there are a lot of allowable uses that you can use these funds for. So building a new building, right? I think that you have to make the justification that you are building the building because you need it to create additional space so that you can social distance and educate students. That one seems like a harder sell for me, but work with your federal programs consultant on that specifically. I think it is easier to justify that you are replacing your HVAC system in an existing building with this money than building a new building.
Good.
Same thing with buses. I think, buses would be allowable, right? But it would need to connect to and tie to, we are buying these buses because we can't have as many kids on the bus because of social distancing and safety precautions. So I think just be mindful of that. And again, work with your federal programs consultant. Brian, good question. Like, is the federal government reaching out to state departments of education? I think that they did. I think they were, CCSSO, which represents state superintendents, was really instrumental in getting the COVID package in December passed. And this is 100% Aaron Rausch speaking and not ODE but it's almost like people forgot, right? Everyone was busy celebrating Christmas and New Year's and had taken a couple weeks off. And, then there was the transition and then there were capital rights. I mean, like, so much is going on. It's like people just forgot, like, you just passed a bill for $900 billion. I don't know, because I don't know. It's a lot of money. I think that there has been a belief that has been communicated that in order to get students back into schools, districts need more resources. And I think that maybe to some extent, Ohio's situation in most of you, I mean, some of you have been all in 5 days a week since the fall. And many of you have been hybrid, at least. There were only a few schools that started virtual at the beginning of the year. And now, that the vaccine is rolling out, most of you are, if you have not already, planning to return to school. So I know that, like, in Chicago, there has been disagreement amongst the teachers union about returning, but some of that is not about money, right? It is about the bargaining unit and employee relations. It is not about spending another dollar in order to be prepared. So that's kind of Aaron Rausch's commentary, not the Ohio Department of Education. It seems like that people just forgot we did this a month and a half ago. Can we use ESSER for pre-K? Yeah, you can, because Title I allows you to use some of your funds for preschool, and so you could use some of your ESSER II funds to support that. And I think that falls generally under continuity of operations. Some people are using the ESSER funds to help bolster losses in your food service fund, or even your athletic budget. My recommendation there is stick to your supplemental contracts for your athletic budget. If you were paying your football coach out of your athletic fund, just pay them now out of ESSER directly, in order to align your expenditures in your athletic funds with what your revenues looked like. Because I think that falls under continuity of operations and providing services to students.
That's a great example.
Dan, I think fair comment. I don't see the impacted districts, so we won't name names, but there are a couple of school districts in Ohio that aren't getting any ESSER II money because they don't get Title I funds. And so ODE is looking at that and identifying, are there opportunities to use either our state activity funds or using the governor's emergency education relief funds to provide a little more balance to some of these federal funds. The use of the Title I formula and those allocations is a federal requirement. So I haven't seen that the Biden administration's plan would change or remove that. So I'm assuming that it would be, it would operate in the same way. But I think that's a fair point about there are, some, and as the numbers get bigger, there are more different, more vast differences between what some districts are getting in ESSER II versus others. Oh, Tracy, that is a really good question. Non-public equitable services. I did not say that, and that's probably like one of the best parts of this. There are no non-public equitable services in ESSER II. It's a big headache. You don't have to worry about it. The federal government's solution to that was a program called EANS. I hate the federal government's use of acronyms, but the Emergency Assistance Non-Public School Grant. And we got $154 million as a carve out of the GEAR grant, the governor's grant. And the state is responsible for administering the application directly from the state to the non-public school. We are not in the business of providing these services directly, so we'll likely be contracting with ESCs regionally to be able to provide the services directly to the non-public schools. We're still working all of those details out, but you will not have to worry about it as a traditional district.
Good news. Never mind, question, answer, okay. Impact, we should do fair school funding. Do you see that question about OEA targeting ESSER II for negotiations?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't put, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to say we saw, right? The data bears out that FY20 you generally ended with more cash in the bank than what you did the year prior to that, and that is a trend that has been, ongoing for many years. It would seem that with the restoration of some of the governor's funding cuts, all of this ESSER II money, for some of you that don't have increased costs, directly because of maybe you're still partially remote or fully remote, that we would expect to see fiscal year 21 balances to increase as well. And the presence of this money is going to put even more pressure on that. I think that, there are some folks that are afraid the legislature is going to cut your funding based on the amount of ESSER funding that you get or based on your cash balance. I don't think that will happen. The state of New York did that in ESSER I. New York City, public schools, they got $800 million in ESSER I. The state cut them by $800 million to the penny. The governor, I think, chose not to do that. He chose to look at those two things separately. I don't think that the legislature is going to say, just because you are getting more money in ESSER, we're going to give you less money in your state foundation funding. I do think that it gives the legislature a bit of a pass, though. I do think that it makes them feel like, hey, maybe I don't need to increase state funding for schools by $300 million because we're giving them all of this federal money over here. So I don't think it causes anyone to say we're going to cut schools, but I think it takes the pressure off of them.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine that they're thinking what most of us will be thinking. If I'm going to take a load off of my general fund, I'm going to move as much as I can to fund 507, which leaves more money available in 01.
Yeah,
I think most folks ought to just realize that the teachers unions, they're going to, organized. They're pretty smart, put that together. And if you're not doing that, they're probably going to suggest, why aren't you? Because we need to get a pay raise. So, I mean, that's straightforward,
Yep.
probably.
Shelley, so I think, yeah, I think you can say you have a loss of revenue in your athletic fund. My recommendation to you is that you are focusing on the people, because the focus of ESSER is like keeping staff employed, keeping teachers employed, and that you focus on the expenses that you shift from your athletic budget over to ESSER are your supplemental contracts. That's my recommendation. Another way that you can do it is you could move things from your athletic budget into your general fund. And if you wanted to do it in maybe this is obviously a little more complicated, but move teachers, right? Teacher salaries, which absolutely can be paid for out of ESSER, move that from your general fund into ESSER. That frees up general fund money that you can pay for whatever you need to, in your athletic budget or your food service fund. But I think that the continuity of operations gives you basically a blank check to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So I think it's fine to just move it directly from your athletic fund over to your 507.
I think that's what I'm hearing from you, Aaron, that continuity of effort. When I think about continuity of effort, if I have 100 bus fleet and 10 of them are crapping out on me, in order for me to maintain continuity of effort, I need new buses. That, I think, and it's something, rather than reading through all the details of that ESSER stuff, not that people shouldn't, but trying to grasp a concept that if continuity of effort, what would happen if I didn't do this over here? Would we be able to maintain services? And if the answer could be no, then that probably would fall under a continuity of effort, as just a way to think through the things that might be something you could use this money for.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that as long as you are detailing it, and especially in your athletic budget and your 006, right? If you've seen a drop in revenue because you saw a drop in revenue in your food service fund because you don't have as many kids at school, because they're remote, and you are keeping your food service folks employed, or you have the same amount of expenses, attached to that. I think that is all justifiable.
Another good point. We tend to think of this thing as being a general fund situation.
Yeah.
ESSER is not concerned with that. If your food service is losing money and you need to provide food for students as OSIC, you could use it for that as well, athletics, etc. So that's good. It's not concerned about general fund. It's concerned about just your school.
Yeah, it is the continuity of operations, right? That the pandemic has impacted your operations across all areas. And and the athletics, right? You are committing to continuing to provide opportunities for extracurriculars, right? Not just athletics. Let's not, forget the mock trial team, which I was, a member of in high school, or the band. But you're continuing to provide these opportunities for students, and you are doing so even though you cannot generate your normal revenue because you are not allowing spectators in the stands. We used a part of our ESSER state activity funds to provide some funding to the Ohio High School Athletic Association, because they basically don't have any revenue because they're not having events and tournaments, etc., that they are selling tickets to.
I see a question here that causes me to shake a little bit. I'll read it. Can we move ESSER funds to our general fund to cover the reduction from the state for FY20 and the balance we're not refunded for 21? That looks like a fund transfer from 507 to 01.
Yeah, you should be transferring your expenses from the general fund and moving them into 507.
But you cannot transfer money from
Correct.
507 to 01 like a
correct.
That's why I read that, and that scared me when I saw that.
Yeah, but Beth, so I think maybe the intent of your question, if
move the cost,
you saw funding, you all saw some sort of a cut from the state, and that is part of your justification of why you need to shift some of your expenditures over to ESSER.
But they would have to be identified as specific expenditures that.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And Beth, I thought that was just a fund to fund transfer, and that's what I was reading that to be. So that the state auditor's office, they may miss some things, but they usually lock in on fund to fund transfers as easy finds.
I know that, and we will be interested to hear from you, because the Auditor of State's office is, I think, just now going through those of you who had ESSER expenditures that you incurred and reflected in FY20. That because the federal government, OMB, was very delayed in getting the compliance supplement out. I will tell you on the non-public equitable services question issue with ESSER I, it is not part of the compliance supplement that the Auditor of State will look at your equitable services for ESSER I. I know that there were concerns that perhaps you had miscalculated it, you had spent too much, not enough. You need to make sure that you are meeting your obligations as an LEA, but it is not going to be specifically identified as something that they look at through your audit.
A question that hasn't come up yet. I know Career Center state funding was not cut because of maintenance of effort for fiscal year 20 or 21. I'm assuming a question is floating around out there with the governor's proposal right now that career centers would just continue to be funded at the level they have been funded at for 22, 23.
That's correct.
Increase. Okay.
That's correct. And then the JVSDs would see increased student wellness and success funding, just like other entities. The I lost my train of thought with JVSDs. We know that it's only traditional districts and community schools that are getting the ESSER II funds. So, we're in conversation with the governor's office about additional funding for JVSDs, either through our ESSER state activities or the GEAR fund.
Okay.
The length of time, the period of availability for ESSER, for ESSER II, I think you were at ESSER III, but I think you mean ESSER II, is through September of 2023. So ESSER I goes through September of 2021. Let me start over. ESSER I, March 13th, 2020 to September 30th, 2022. ESSER II, March 13th, 2020 to September 30th, 2023. So these ESSER funds will take us through the next biennium.
Yep. It is a possibility that if Biden puts 3 times the amount of ESSER money on us, that even a well-intended governor who's running for re-election might have to say, at some point, how are we going to use this money? I mean,
yeah.
Okay, that's no comment necessary on that. That's.
I see that little red record button. I probably have already said more than I should.
That nobody's ever ratted him out. From the federal procurement standpoint. Question might be a good one. With moving funds out of the general fund over to ESSER II, what should be paid attention to from a federal procurement standpoint, especially if done via redistribution?
Jason, you as a former state auditor might have thoughts specifically on that. I think the uniform guidance and the federal procurement will apply to these ESSER funds. So if there's any concern or consideration on that, you perhaps stick to salaries and benefits.
Okay.
But Brian Jones would be someone to kind of think about or discuss.
All right. Well, I think the chat is running low here. I don't know. I think I can speak for everybody that want to say thank you, Aaron, for your time. Your information is always top notch and right on time and very helpful. So And I have forwarded all of the data out to folks from the budget notes that you had, and Director Murnick, and the student wellness success spreadsheets for traditional and career centers. So
Great.
everybody has the data that you've supplied us. So a big virtual applause.
Yes, I know. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I appreciate the kind words. And, we will, I know, be in contact over the next 5 months as we work through this together. So you all know how to get a hold of me if there are any specific questions that you have.
Okay. Aaron, thank you so much, and thank everybody for attending today. Thanks a lot. And
Thanks.
we will be posting this on our website if folks want to see anything again, or have somebody else they'd want to have take a look at it. Thank you. Have a great weekend.